Is there a part of you that thinks it's time for me to get back in the studio, or you're in no rush to do that, or are you waiting till the time is right for you?
Yeah, I think...
Because we can't use the word retirement for you.
Yeah. No, I already did that. I can't do that ever again. I would say I want to make music, but it has to be something important. I don't want to just make a bunch of tunes.
What happens to hip-hop if Tupac walks back in and says, "This time I brought receipts"? Not a hologram, not a tribute night, a real presence that flips the table and makes the biggest names in the game stare at the floor. Because the story exploding across your feed tonight isn't whispering. It's daring you to imagine the power structure of the last 30 years getting cracked down the middle by one name that refuses to die. One post, 3 platforms, and the internet decides to play detective. A grainy clip in bad lighting, a profile that looks too familiar, a gate people swear they've seen before. Within minutes, everybody's zooming in and scrubbing audio like it's a forensics lab. The walk cycle, the shoulder roll, a half-turned jawline. Fans compare it to old footage frame for frame, nodding like they just solved a cold case. Hashtags stampede across timelines. Threads turn into late-night war rooms. Somebody drops a timeline, somebody else drops a map, and suddenly the story doesn't feel like a one-off sighting. It feels like a breadcrumb trail people were somehow waiting to follow. Then the trail shifts south, way south. The Havana Corridor. The place where believers say the myth gets muscle. You've heard versions of it for years. A safe handoff, a quiet runway, a favor called in by people who knew how to make a person disappear without leaving a ripple. The way the narrative flows online, it isn't a clumsy escape. It's a choreographed exit. A vanishing act done by someone who'd already mastered the art of staying 2 steps ahead. Add one more ingredient that fuels the obsession. A family tie that makes the route feel almost inevitable. The idea is intoxicating because it doesn't require magic. It only requires planning, and the kind of loyalty you don't put on a t-shirt. But the whispers that keep this alive didn't come from the timeline. They came from inside the room. Those late-night interviews you can't unhear. Offhand lines that never really felt offhand. Comments that sound casual until you replay them at 2 a.m. and they turn into red sirens. Old friends, industry heavyweights, and people who sat close enough to feel the heat, talking just enough to spark a fire, then leaning back as the internet takes the oxygen and builds the blaze.
Diddy to come on stage, pat him on his and then make the statement to people in the world that can't nobody call me Sean but Jay-Z.
People latch onto a tone, a smirk, a "you never know," and suddenly that's the match. It's not one quote, it's a pattern. It's the way certain stories keep circling the same details like crows that know where the good bones are buried. But this is where the story takes a turn, because the centerpiece of the legend isn't just a sighting. It's the claim that somewhere, locked away far from public hands, there's a folder, call it a dossier, call it a time bomb, stacked with the kind of receipts that end careers. Not rap beef, not diss track pettiness, meetings. Calendars, names, paper that connects dots other people have spent years trying to keep in separate drawers. The way believers sketch it out, you're looking at clean summaries and dirty details. Who sat where, what got promised, which enemies got solved, and who signed off on the plan. The Forbidden Folder is the internet's favorite character in this drama, because it sounds like the only thing more powerful than a legend with documentation. And if you think that sounds like Hollywood folklore, wait until you hear who the internet puts in the crosshairs when they talk about what's allegedly on those tapes. Because the story doesn't stop at paper, it escalates to audio. Not studio takes or playful freestyles, quiet rooms and closed doors. The believers swear there are recordings that capture the business conversations no one expected to hear outside those walls. Conversations where the tone gets low, the words get coded, and the stakes get real. The kind of audio that if it ever surfaced, wouldn't just feed a trending tag, it would feed grand juries. People imagine a line of prosecutors who would gladly trade blurry video for clean sound if that sound came with dates, context, and voices they can match to patterns they already suspect. And whether or not those files exist, one truth about now is unavoidable.
Somebody said Tupac is coming back this year and stuff. Well, I've been back.
The timing is brutally good for a story like this to land. Two moguls, one storm. Years of headlines, years of lawyers, years of public opinion ping-ponging between nothing to see here and I always felt something was off. One has been wrestling with cases that made his name trend for months. The other keeps getting dragged into people's theories whether he likes it or not. The reality is complicated, sure, but the public appetite for easy narratives is not. When people read that verdicts were split, or that suits got dropped, or that charges weren't part of the picture, it doesn't slow the culture down, it makes it race faster to imagine a future leak that ties it all together. Because in the attention economy, what's official is just the starting line. The ending is whatever breaks the most dopamine. And right now, that ending looks like a comeback steeped in revelation. So if a ghost returns with receipts, what collapses first? Start with the boardroom. A single leak can move money faster than a press conference. Sponsors will cut distance like a parachute line if there's even a whiff of liability. The catalog wars get ugly. Suddenly, who owns what becomes who wants to be seen owning what. Lawyers who used to be attack dogs start behaving like archaeologists, brushing dust off decade-old contracts looking for fine print that helps them leave the scene without a stain. You'll see sudden alliances, sudden silences, and those carefully crafted statements that accidentally say too much by saying almost nothing. And that's just the top floor. Down on the ground, artists start counting their masters like they're counting oxygen tanks. The whisper network becomes a megaphone. People who've kept their heads down for a decade start remembering dates and faces. They start joining calls that feel like group therapy for a business that has treated people like props. The psychology flips. Proof stops being a requirement. Belief becomes enough. Because online, belief isn't just a feeling, it's a force that moves charts, kills deals, and rewrites reputations live.
Real. I've laid out the facts for you, America. It's time to spread the truth. Wake up, America.
Before any court weighs in, the public can do the kind of damage that takes years to repair. If it's repairable at all. Here's the part people keep missing, and it might be the most dangerous piece of all. The story doesn't need to be confirmed to change behavior. The story just needs to be plausible enough to create pressure. And plausible enough is a low bar when you're dealing with a culture that's been burned by the industry before. You mix in a few familiar names, a few familiar rumors, and a new clip that feels like a returning shadow, and boom! The pressure starts doing the work for you. Doors that were locked begin to crack. People who weren't available for comment suddenly are. Something about the air changes. Folks act like they're preparing for a storm even if the clouds never break. But if you want to understand why this specific legend hits harder than other celebrity they're still alive talk, you have to look at what the name represents. Tupac isn't just an artist, he's a pressure point. He's the person people invoke when they want to talk about business deals that don't add up, about contracts that look like traps, about a culture that built palaces on stories of pain and then tried to act surprised when the walls started whispering. Calling his name does something to the room. It makes people sit up straight. It makes the old guard uncomfortable and the new kids feel bolder than usual. It turns what if into a dare. There's another thread that runs through this, and it lives in those little claims people toss off like they don't know they're tossing grenades. A line about a late night call on a private radio frequency, a friend of a friend who says a flight plan didn't match the official timeline, a funeral detail that never rang true to someone's cousin who conveniently once worked at a crematorium. On their own, they're nothing. Together, they become a campfire story told by 1,000 voices, all trimming and adjusting the details until the tale is tight and hard to shake. The internet doesn't need a perfect puzzle. It just needs enough pieces to make the outline look like a face you recognize. And yet, here's where the tension goes from cultural to existential. Imagine for a moment that the folder is real. Imagine it isn't messy. Imagine it's organized, like it was designed for a courtroom, not a clickbait thread. Names spelled correctly, dates that cross-check with travel records, conversations that match known meetings. Imagine audio that isn't all whispers and muffled laughter. Imagine it's clear enough to transcribe, clean enough to authenticate.
Pac dead, Pac alive. I'm the wrong facts. But I tell you this, if you try to find a person who cremated Tupac, After he supposed cremated Tupac, he retired and vanished into the sun.
You don't need a pylon. You just need one clip that lines up with a few lines of paper. And suddenly, the quiet part gets said out loud, with consequences. Whatever people thought the old era was built on would get regraded in public. And the A students might discover their report cards were printed on borrowed paper. Here's the wildest part. Even without any leak, the pendulum is already swinging. Artists are done playing the game on hard mode. They build from their bedrooms and their tour vans. They drop without permission. They swerve around gatekeepers because the gate moved to their phones. The idea that someone could return, physically or symbolically, and hand them a map of who did what and why? That's rocket fuel for a generation already living like they're one clip away from independence. The future people are picturing isn't just revenge. It's restructuring. It's label contracts getting rewritten in real time because fear of exposure is a better negotiator than any manager on retainer. And before we wrap, there's one final detail everyone keeps missing. It's the simplest one. Whether the man steps into a camera frame or not, the symbol already did. People are altering their plans around a rumor. That's power. No court needed, no official statement required. The story moved the room. If you're on top of the industry and you feel fine tonight, you're not reading the air. The ground is shifting because the audience discovered they can make tectonic plates move by standing in the same place and chanting the same name. They don't need proof to ask better questions. They need momentum, and they've got it. So where does that leave the two names the internet loves to drag into the center of this? In a spotlight that gets hotter the longer any mystery lingers. Lawyers can argue, PR can spin, but a narrative like this doesn't wait for official responses. It builds its own scaffolding. If anything ever drops that looks like a real receipt, you will hear the snap across the culture like a branch breaking in a silent forest. Sponsorships won't evaluate, they'll vanish. Artists who were neutral will suddenly remember why neutrality felt like complicity. And the rest of us will do what we always do. We'll hit play, we'll rewind, we'll argue about authenticity while the numbers race up and the power maps redraw themselves on the fly. There's a heavier angle here too, and it's why this topic isn't just gossip.
Do you believe that Tupac's alive and well? Supposedly he's in Cuba working on new material.
It's about what we accept as normal. How many times can you hear the same kinds of allegations before you stop treating them like isolated incidents and start treating them like symptoms of a machine that was built to run hot and hide the burn marks? People are tired of, that's just how the business works. They want to know who wrote that manual and why we all agreed to live by it. A name like Tupac becomes the doorway you walk through to ask those questions. He stands for the version of the culture that refuses to shrug and keep scrolling. But this is where the story takes a turn, because the ending you're imagining might not be an arrival. It might be a reveal. The return everybody keeps waiting for could happen without a plane landing or a car door opening. It could happen with a file, a 2-minute clip that lives on a server no one can shut down, a PDF that jumps from phone to phone faster than anyone can file a takedown. The kind of reveal that doesn't need a press conference because the press is already in your pocket, sharing the link with a warning and an explosion emoji. That kind of ending doesn't even belong to the person at the center of it. It belongs to the audience that decides what it means. And if you think that sounds like Hollywood folklore, wait until you hear how fast the industry can pretend it didn't know what it knew. You will see world-class athletes of the pivot. You will see executives who claim they needed more information suddenly discover they had more than enough. You will watch veteran commentators revise their takes mid-sentence to align with the new reality, like they'd always been there. Power doesn't like to admit it was surprised. It prefers to act like it planned this. But you don't plan earthquakes, you rebuild after them. And before we wrap, there's one final detail that's worth saying out loud. The reason this story won't die is because it promises two things at once: justice and theater. People want the truth, and they want it to arrive with choreography. They want the reveal to feel earned, inevitable, legendary. They want the name to step through the smoke like it always belonged to the moment. Whether that happens or not isn't the point tonight. The point is how close it suddenly feels, how ready everyone looks, how much the culture is already acting like the knock could come any second. If the knock never comes, here's what still changes. The fear. The fear that somewhere, somehow, there's a folder with your name in it and a timestamp you can't explain. The fear that the room remembers what you said when you thought no one was listening. The fear that ghosts can keep better records than living men. That fear, by itself, can be enough to shift a generation's choices. It can make labels trade control for peace. It can make artists trade silence for leverage. It can make fans trade cynicism for insistence. That's a lot of movement for a rumor people claim they don't believe. So I'll leave you with this. If Tupac walked in tomorrow and put a single clean receipt on the table, what's the first thing you think breaks? Careers, contracts, or the myth that the powerful are untouchable? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me the wildest sighting you've heard and the one receipt that would flip your mind instantly. If you're here for the truth, for the legend, or for the moment where both collide, you're in the right place. Hit like if you felt the ground shift a little while we talked. Subscribe if you want the next chapter the second it hits, because whether the man returns or the symbol does, the message is already at the door, and it's knocking loud.